The last thing we're going to talk about in this particular lecture series is a tool called commenting. And commenting is basically a way for you, the programmer, to describe for yourself or for other programmers just what's going on with your program. And now when you write software, you're writing the actual source code with three people in mind. The first person that you should be keeping in mind is you right in the present, right in that moment, which is to say that you should be writing that source code so that you, as a person who is right there, right then, writing, understands and is easily able to change things. The second person you're writing your source code for is other people, like sort of collectively, which is to say that you should be writing your source code so that way other people can look at your code and figure out what's happening. And the last person you're writing for is you in the future, which is sort of like other people, that you'll be a different person by then. But imagine what would happen if you were to write all of your code, if you were to write everything, so that in 6 months, or 6 years, or 60 years, you could look at your code and figure out exactly what you were doing and exactly how and why you made those decisions without ever needing to worry about anything else. And when we get there, what we've done is we've achieved sort of the virtue of readability. Your first job, of course, is to write code that works. But then your second job is to write code that works in such a way that it's easy to change and to improve for better, to make it better in the future, and also so that it's easy to look at and understand. But sometimes it's really difficult to do that with just the code itself. And this is where comments come in. Comments are lines in your source code, and there are two different ways that we can set them up, which are ignored by the compiler, but which let you describe pretty much anything you want. The first type of comment is what we call an end-of-line comments. These don't have to go at the end of lines, but they can go on their own lines, but conventionally they go at the end of a line. And we see one example of this in the line of code that's on this slide, that int height is equal to 72, and then those double slashes, that double forward slash, what that does is that sets up a comment that says to the compiler, ignore everything else on this line and move on. And this is a place where it might be useful for us to indicate that the height is measured in inches, or millimeters, or centimeters, or whatever it might be. This is a place where it's useful for us to do that, because that's a thing that might not be obvious when you first look at your code. Now, what we can also do, if we're really feeling it, we can get into multi-line comments, and I'll show you what those look like in a source code file here in just a second. So end-of-line comments start with 2 slashes. Multi-line comments start with a slash and then an asterisk, no spaces between them, and then they end with an asterisk and then a slash, again no spaces between them. And everything between the start to your multi-line comment and the end of your multi-line comment is ignored by the compiler. So you can use this to carve out huge swaths of territory if you feel so inclined. And sometimes, this is the way that you'll do your honor code in every assignment, but it's also a way that you can have multi-line descriptions. Now generally, when you use comments, you use them to leave signposts for yourself as you write, or you use them to make sure that what you're doing makes sense. When I write code, particularly if I'm trying to solve a problem that I don't know how to solve just yet, I'll usually try to break it into smaller parts, and I'll leave a comment for each part in sort of the order that I think it's all going to go. What that does is it lets me focus on just one thing at a time, and I don't have to worry about memorizing anything else because it's already there. It's already there on the screen, and all I have to do if I forget what I'm doing next is just look at the screen and find out. Now let's take a look at what comments look like in source code. Excuse me. So we're going to go back to our Hello Math. We're going to add a couple of comments here. So the first thing that we might do is add an end-of-line comment on our very first line. We can say the import java.util.scanner lets us use the scanner class. Now this isn't a terribly useful comment, but I just want to show you what it looks like. And then we might, if we're feeling really crazy, if we're feeling it, we can put another comment here. We'll just put this end of line comment on its own line, so it's still technically the end of the line. And we'll say collect input. And we might do another one down here where we'll say calculate and then display the result. Now for a seasoned programmer, they should be able to figure out what's going on pretty much without even needing to worry about it. But for a novice, or for a really complicated program, things like this are going to sometimes be useful. Now I'm going to show you real fast what multi-line comments look like. We'll just stick one right in between. So we'll start a multi-line comment with a slash and then a star, and you can see how everything turns to blue. We'll make a new line just for fun. This is a multi-line comment. The compiler ignores everything in this block. And we'll close it out. Okay? So we have a couple of single line comments, like that one for example, and we have a multi-line comment block where everything works exactly the way that it should. Our multi-line comment block isn't terribly useful in terms of understanding the program, but it is sort of useful in terms of understanding how these comments work. Our single line comments, things like collect input and then calculate and then display results, these are the types of comments that you can leave in order to make your code make more sense. Especially if you're feeling like you don't fully understand, or if you're feeling like you just want to make sure that when you look back at this in a couple of hours, in a couple of days, in a couple of weeks, that you understand exactly what's going on. It's useful also as sort of an organizational tool in order to make sure that some fool can't come along and screw up your code, or more precisely, that if some fool were to come along and screw up your code, they'd also have to ignore all of the comments, which then means that you would have solid grounds to wag your fingers at them. Alright, so this is comments, and my expectation with comments over the course of this semester is that what you will do with them is include them anytime you feel like your code doesn't speak for itself, or anytime you have something you want to communicate to me, anytime you look something up and you just want to cite the source, anytime you ran into a weird error and then you had to spend time solving it. Comments are your way of talking to me, and also your way of talking to each other. Now for next time, for Thursday, what I'll have you do is finish out Chapter 2. That is to say, read the sections 2.6 through 2.8. You can ignore the other sections if you like, but they're certainly going to be interesting. It's just about creating a graphical user interface, which is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing right now, and will require you to have Java installed on your computer instead of Loki. But I'll have you finish out chapters 2.6 through 2.8, which should be pretty fast. And then at the end of Chapter 2, there are some review exercises that you might consider. And you can either look through those on your own, and then pick the ones that you want to solve, or if you look on Blackboard under Course Materials, there's a folder called Review Sheets, and there's a document in that called Suggested Review Exercises, or something very close to that. And by looking at that, that'll give you a sense of a couple of the review exercises you might choose to use in order to make sure that you're fully prepared, in order to make sure that you fully understand this. Beyond that, the thing that I'll suggest most is take the time right now to really play with the things that we've learned, which is to say to really play with the output and getting input and using variables and making variables and get really, really comfortable with it. The more comfortable you get, the more likely it is that this will become automatic, that this will become a thing that you can do without ever needing to worry about it, which then frees up brain power and energy for you to solve more interesting and more complicated problems. Pretty much every assignment we do, with the exception of the very first one and then one that we do later, so almost every assignment that we do is going to require that you take input from the user, and every assignment that we do is going to require that you output some information to the screen. Which is to say, this is a thing that we're going to be using an awful lot, and so I'll suggest getting pretty good at it, by way of doing some practice. Alright, I'll see you in the future.